All right, I'll just get Carolina to start here.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I hope you're all well there in Canada, and I'm sorry we could not join you today, but let's just get to it. So my name is Carolina Rossini, and I am the co-founder and the director for research and partnership at the Datasphere Initiative. I've been working in tech and policy for over 20 years and worked a lot on open data and back in early 2000s in Creative Commons issues. So all this is very dear to my heart. So I'm sorry I'm not there in person. But anyway, so this session we will explore how data governance models and frameworks impact the ways in which data can be leveraged to tackle global challenges such as climate change, so far and so on. Our goal here is to discuss an idea of open and moving beyond open, the value of holistic data governance in times of crisis. There is a lot of complexity that came up after the idea of open has been advocated for so many years, right? And now we think about what are the friction we have to include back on those models so we can responsibly unlock the value of data for all. Well, to discuss all of this today, we have our panelist, Johannes, who is with us online, I think connecting from DC. Thank you, Johannes, for joining us. And Kassy, who is there with you, who will share why this holistic approach to data governance is essential to an effective open data and open data strategies. Johannes Friedrich is the director of climate data at the World Resources Institute, which is a global research organization that addresses urgent sustainability challenges related to food, forests, water, climate, energy, cities, and the ocean. He leads data strategy on climate, energy, and systems change. We also have with us today Kassy Raymond, who is a technical manager at the Global Burden of Animal Disease, an international initiative that aims to improve decision-making for animal health by integrating data from a variety of sources and sharing tools for analysis. She has also been part of our first cohort of fellows at the Datasphere Initiative, where she developed a lot of research on data graphs, categorization, interoperability, and data quality. It was wonderful to have Kassy this year with us and learn so much from her expertise. You can find more information in some links we're going to be sharing in the chat. So to not hold anybody back anymore, let's just jump to some questions I would like the panelists to address. So perhaps starting with Kassy, at the GBADs, you have been collecting open data to measure the economic and health burden of animal diseases on humans and animals. What are the challenges and obstacles that you have faced when working on this? Kassy.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? I think so. I think the mic's working. So before going into the specifics about the obstacles, I just wanted to provide a bit more information about the type of data the Global Burden of Animal Diseases, or GBADS, has been collecting. So with the overarching goal, as Carol mentioned, of creating models to estimate the economic and health burden of animal diseases on animals and humans at global and national levels. The main objective of the GBADS informatics team, which I'm on, has been collecting, curating, and disseminating data related to these calculations. And the one metric that we've started with, and we really need to know, is the number of livestock of a given species there are in countries and in the world. And we need to know this by age of animal, by production system, by utility of the animal, and by sex. So we've started with animal population numbers because they're key inputs to biomass, which GBADS modelers are using in their disease attribution models. However, it's important to note that these numbers are critical in other estimates as well. they have huge impact when it comes to policy and decision making. So for instance, animal population numbers are used in calculations related to One Health challenges, and that is challenges at the intersection of human, animal, and environmental health, such as climate change, so greenhouse gas emissions, nutrition and protein availability, and antimicrobial resistance. And this all includes being able to reuse and integrate data from various sources, including open data, and to compare the data between the sources and over time to see progress and change. So starting with these key numbers, the livestock population numbers, the main challenges for us include issues with interoperability, including semantic interoperability of the data. So interoperability, which is the ability to exchange information, can first be associated with the ability to actually access the information that we need in some kind of digitized format. So livestock population data is available from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations Statistical Database, FAOStat. They provide data for countries, but not at the level of granularity that's needed to perform the calculations, because we need the data by, like I said, sex, production system, age, and utility. So this type of data is openly available from governments or from Eurostat in the case of member countries of the EU. However, on the country level, first off, it might not be available in a digitized format. Obviously in Canada, we have open data portals, so that's not necessarily an issue. But in the case of Ethiopia, we actually had to go and scrape PDF documents because the data wasn't available publicly. So in this instance, the data were not interoperable at a foundational level, and we had to overcome this challenge by scraping the data and making it machine actionable. But once we actually have the data, the next challenge is understanding the context, understanding what the data means and how it was collected. And this is a part that we call semantic interoperability, or the unambiguous exchange of the meaning of the data between a sender and receiver, whether that sender and receiver be machine to machine, machine to human, or human to human. And without this context or a definition of the categories or naming conventions being provided, including relevant metadata or standards, it's so difficult to derive the meaning from this data and actually use it. And so what I mean by this is the names of the same categories can have completely different meanings. So this subjects the data to misinterpretation from a user, making the integration and comparison and reuse of the data extremely difficult. So something that I did was look at how organizations are naming these livestock population categories. So in an analysis, looking at livestock population data from Eurostat, FAOStat, the Ethiopian Central Statistics Agency, and the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOA, there were over 100 naming conventions for livestock, making interoperability between these data sets, all reporting the same types of number, extremely hard to establish. It's so hard to integrate these. We have to figure out whether the number of poultry birds means the same thing as the number of chickens, or whether it's the sum of hens, turkeys, chicks, guinea fowl, or is a dairy cow the same thing as adult female cattle greater than 2 years of age, or does it also include adult female cattle less than 2 years of age not used for rearing? So there's a lack of standards in this sense. And then you have the policy side of things, where there's a call for the use of standards to improve the interoperability of the data. We see this in calls for action from data strategies. Stats Canada has one, where short-term activities include research and selection of data standards, use of taxonomies, ontologies, and vocabularies. We see this in a call for an integrated international data system in the World Bank's World Development Report 2021. And we see this in the Ethiopian data strategy as well. So we're supposed to adopt standards, but what are the standards? So in the case of national livestock data at a country level, the categories used to collect the data are mandated in legislation in a lot of cases. So in Canada, it's the National Statistics or National Agricultural Data Act that mandates how livestock animals are to be categorized, how we're collecting the data. In the European Union, the legislation requires member states to report national livestock statistics according to a set of categories mandated in that act, and member states might also have their own set of requirements on a national government level. So we have data strategies saying that we need interoperability in standards, and another set of policies that are actually enforcing the standards to begin with. And this is a huge silo. And then there's other standards from the technical community that haven't really lasted. So the challenge is really reconciling this data, figuring out a way to use and integrate the past data and find a way forward to bridge these policy and technical gaps that we see in the enforcement of standards, and then leverage the data. So that's all from me for that question. Sorry, a little bit of a rant there.
Thank you. No, I think that's great information to pose some of the difficulties even when we are working with open data. So to turn the mic to Johannes. So Johannes, you have extensive experience working with data platforms to track the impact of climate change and protect the planet. What do you consider are the risks of using open data in your field? Especially, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I put some links in the chat that you can explore by yourself. We're a little bit over time, so I won't do any screen sharing. And you can go into some of these platforms as an example yourself. To just go a little bit, I'm going to do this like a little bit more higher level, kind of on the experience that we've had with these type of data platforms. And it's also, to be clear, I'm coming from, we would call it a science-driven do tank. So we're not an academic organization, but we really aim to have measurable change based on the tools, insight, and data that we publish, which is not easy. And when it comes to data governance, the topic of this, I have three main messages or insights, kind of things that we've learned over the years working on a lot of these data platforms, some of which I will mention as an example. The one is do co-development with the right, with your users, as well as with the right partners across all of your stages. So this is kind of a things that we often see, that while people talk about the need for better data, or there's a lack of data, they often do create this quite in isolation. So what we've learned with a lot of trial and error is that it's really important, even in the early design stage, when you even set your research agenda, when you say what you actually want to do, to talk to whoever might use the data or whoever might benefit from it. And this is sometimes, this can be anything from the academic communities to actually like some of the governments you want to work with, or some of the local city actors, or some of the people in low-income countries that are actually do not have a technical background. So this is kind of like a key things that we've seen to do this, not just at like some points where we say, oh, we had like these kind of conversations with some of the people that we think are end users, but having it consistently through the process from the beginning to the end. The second piece is be explicit about the role that your project has and the value add that it has. So this is kind of like a thing that we've seen quite often, that people talk about use cases often, but in many cases don't actually quite understand what that actually means, or might not take it serious enough. So for example, when people, one of the typical flags that we've seen often when people start saying, oh, we're targeting decision makers or policy makers, that often means they don't actually know who their end user is, because decision makers and policy makers is such a broad term. It can be anything from like local farmer decision makers in sub-Saharan Africa to like a member of parliament in the UK, and they obviously have like vastly different needs, vastly different technical knowledge, and so on. So it's very important to be explicit on what value you're actually trying to add. And it's okay to not target decision makers. So this is going to be the first example that we have with this project that I put in the chat, which is called Power Explorer, the power plant database. If you just Google power plant database, it's a database in its core. is it going to be, does it actually influence decision makers, or like actually the people who might like create your laws and policies? Probably not directly, but it has been a successful project in that it helped a lot of other organizations, and this is mostly more on the academic, on the research, on the modeler side, to, for example, use the power plant data to model energy demand, to look at the impacts of water use from power plants and so on, that can be then used to inform decision makers. But we've been realistic in saying this is like, just because we publish a database doesn't mean that it like the end users are these type of decision makers. They can be also academics. And then we've done a lot of, and I hope to publish a blog about this eventually, we've done a lot of overviews or thinking about what kind of role these kind of data tools can play. To give you some example, this can range in some cases to not even create new data. One of the most successful projects that we had at WRI is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which basically stems from the problem that companies didn't have any standards to actually, when they say, here's our emissions that we emit, they didn't know like how do you even measure this? How do we make it comparable? And we've created a standard across the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that's now used by over 90% of the Fortune 500 companies, so that they can actually, if they say, here's our emissions, they are actually comparable across companies. But we hadn't created any data with this. It was an interactive process which was governed and pushed forward very collaboratively with the end users to build consensus. So there might be often things where you actually, where like to solve a data issue, you might not actually need to create data first. It might actually be about like consensus finding. And then there's also other projects. Again, like put them in the chat, you can Google them easily. Climate Watch being one example, but it was just a new tool that we just launched last week, which is called the Systems Change Lab, which is tracking progress on a lot of different environmental issues to see how we can actually like achieve the Paris Agreement, mitigate climate change, adapt to climate change, but also halt biodiversity loss and have a just transition. And a lot of the data that's on there is actually not new in a sense, but the tracking that we're doing is new. And we are very concrete there in the value that we're adding for whom. So we're not saying this platform is for everyone, but it's, for example, particularly interesting for funding organizations or people who want to set their goals, philanthropies, and certain government agencies that are setting certain targets. So be explicit what you're trying to do, but also say it's okay that you can't do everything. So this is number two. And then number three, really quick, is make sure that data is the actual problem. In some cases, we always talk about like, let's get new data. Data is the data. If we have more data, what you can measure, you can manage. And yes, data is sometimes a baseline and a base requirement. But also be realistic. Is it actually the data that's missing? Is it the political will? Is it the knowledge? Is it sometimes the capacity, the insight? Is the data actionable? And this is kind of like a message that I also have like to some of the people who are planning their projects, as well as to funders, being just like, be realistic. Not every project can have a massive impact just with data, because a lot of times you need like other pieces to this, or you might need more campaigns than just like pure data. But yeah, so these are kind of like three high-level messages of what we've learned through all of this work that we've been doing. Co-development across all stages with your end user, and ideally co-governance. Be explicit about your role and your value adders and what you're not doing, and making sure that like when you say you're going to make change with data, data is the actual like barrier to action. So quick summary.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you so much. You covered a lot of things, including something that would go towards my next question around your recommendation. So I'm gonna put a couple of questions here together, Kassy and Johannes. So I was actually talking with the folks at the data lab at the World Bank recently, right? And one of the things they told me, but also other folks in the field, is that lots of organizations are producing data goods, right? Or data products, or some form of knowledge out of data. and they want to share with policymakers or a certain target audience that supposedly has to do something with that and produce a certain impact on the ground, right? But especially in the global south, and I'm from Brazil originally, right? There is a lack of potentially data literacy on the ground to really use and benefit from these data goods. In your fields, how do you see this, and what are the recommendations you have moving forward, right? Is something that we need to do on the side of data, how open data helps in that, or is something that we need to do on the side of the people that we want to benefit from the products you guys are generating, right? Kassy, do you want to start, and then perhaps Johannes? You're
Just
mute.
because,
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I said I'll pivot a little bit from my rant about standards for a second, because the informatics theme the informatics theme at GBADS also does work on data products, including dashboards. And as I mentioned, liberating some of that data that's locked in PDF documents for countries that might not have the infrastructure to support a more modern data dissemination. So we had some colleagues actually just go to Ethiopia and do a stakeholders meeting. How do the data products like the dashboards and the digitization of the data impact you as a people from the Central Statistics Agency in Ethiopia? And is it worth our while to continue doing these exercises? I just got emails actually last night with incredible feedback from the people from the Ethiopia CSA saying that they want to be more involved in this process so then they can continue doing the digitization at their level in their own country. So this was a great response, because it's one thing for us as GBADS, a program that wants to do this modeling, and as someone who's more on the tech side, as someone that wants to do the coding and the data governance stuff. But it's another thing to see that direct impact on the people that it's their data, you know what I mean? They make it available in these PDF documents, but they don't have it digitized. So now we're going to be working with them, and they're one of our stakeholders, to make the data products better for them and teach them to use some of the tools that we've created. So accessing these databases and bridging some of the silos that they said that they have on a national level in terms of just the data not being able to be integrated between different silos in the statistics agency. So I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but I think it kind of brings together some of the things that we were talking about identifying those key stakeholders. How does this data actually have impact? And I mean, I guess we'll see that more when they're able to get a hold of their own data in this better, more open form, and see whether it does have impact and they're able to do things with it to measure progress on a national level.
Yeah, thank you, Kassy. No, I think you're right. And one of the things we see is an increased movement around what is the value of data, right? Who the data benefits. So this example of the guys on the field reaching out and saying, hey, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of the design. Exactly. Right? I think that's the way we all need to go, right? There is a lot of discussions around data coming out of smart cities on the same way, right? What data are going to capture for who and why? Will that benefit an investor in my city, or will that benefit citizens, right? And I think, Johannes, we were talking something similar around your work, but I would love to hear your response to that and perhaps some of the recommendations you have in mind.
Yeah, to build on what Kassy said, an interesting things that we've often observed is in our line of work is that there's actually a big gap in data use, that in many cases the data, as she said, like might be even there. People might be even collecting them, but then there's like somewhere locked up in PDFs. This can be, sometimes it can be like the standardization, the issue, sometimes it can be like the data formats, the openness and so on. But in some cases, there's also like often other issues that we've seen in that like data might be actually open and sitting around there, but it's still not usable to people. So to give you the example of Climate Watch, a lot of the data, we have like the most comprehensive data sets around countries' global greenhouse gas emissions by sector, by country for over 150 years that you can explore. We are not collecting this data by ourselves with countries. We are taking what's already out there and we're compiling it and we're making it really, really easily understandable and explorable and usable. And that's kind of like a thing where we're seeing things like the data is actually there. It's just not in a way that the users that actually have very specific questions, have their very specific problems, like a lot of these countries are now creating new national climate plans, these NDCs, and they need to know both what are the spectrum of GHG emissions that our country has, what are the trends, what do other countries, what kind of actions do other countries do? And in theory, that information is out there, but what we do is partner with some of the international organizations, with some of the academic institutions that are publishing this data and really translating it for them to say, here's some of the key insights that you actually want to find out. And you can always dive deeper. It's a very, like we're building these, that's why we're building these very interactive tools. And then a very definite things that we've always found, which is why it's like so interesting, what Kassy said as well, being just like having these conversations with some of the end users and the stakeholders there, is we've switched most of our activities from Climate Watch away from the technical side and actually spend over 50% of all of our time just on trainings and working with the end users. And the interesting thing is that we like the tool, if people go there, they usually say like, I love it. It's really cool. It's really like, it's a great interactivity and usability. But at the end of the day, they still need some of the basic trainings. Most of the people that we're talking with, and we've like trained probably around 3,000 people over the last 2 years in the tool, their questions are so basic. Their questions are often like so simple, where we're being just this like, oh, we thought you need to really dive in or need the most complex data kind of that you can do. And they might need over time, but at the end of the day, often some of them like some of the basic understandings of the have some really basic questions that they just want to have answered immediately. So this is kind of where we've seen like, if we actually want to translate that data into something that we say is impactful and drives outcomes and so on, a lot of this actually working with users and in our case, just literally just training them is we found is a hugely helpful activities to do.
Thank you, Johannes. And we are having a good discussion on the in the chat if PDF is really open data or not. Right, one thing is to think about open data, the license piece, but the other thing is to really think about making it accessible and easily accessible and usable. But thank you, Lee, so maybe we can open for questions. I don't know if there are questions there in the audience live, or if you have a question and you're online, please put it in the chat. And if not, I do have more questions, but Kassy, are any hands up there?
No, but I know they're pretty lively, so I'm sure someone has something for us at the end of today. Or they ran out of coffee, I don't know.
Folks are shy over there. I know it's
not
hard
too much
to have hybrid panels sometimes. Well, one of the things I want to ask you is, how much of the data you work with is actually open data, or in which stage of openness the data is, right? From not just the license part, but also the technical part. And if you had any pushback on that, right? I remember some anecdotes on biodiversity being put it out there, open data on biodiversity, and then you have hunters from the global north going visit folks in Colombia, right, and hunt down animals because there was open data about the local biodiversity. But how do you feel about that? How are the negatives? How are perhaps the friction we have to put back in open data to deal with these unintended consequences? And if you encounter anything like that in your sectors. Johannes?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond quickly to it because I know we're also getting over time. But yes, there's actually a lot of cases where data isn't open. I always like this quote, which many of you have heard, which is data wants to be free, but not everyone actually knows that there's actually a second part to this. If you Google it, there's data wants to be free because it wants to be shared. It can be really useful if it's free and open. But then there's a second part, which is data does actually wants to be closed and wants to be expensive because it's valuable. And it's like it's something that gives you a cutting edge, and it's something that requires effort. And we've definitely seen a lot in the climate change area where we had to work with organizations to really say that the value of their data increases significantly if it's open. So some of my happiest moments were when we worked with other NGOs and we partnered with them, which is why governance is actually so important, inclusive governance, that you're not doing your projects in isolation, but trying to partner with other organizations around the space. Is that there was a big German NGO that was doing actually a lot of data analysis, and they were government funded and mission driven, but all their data was closed because they really wanted to be like, this is our data and this is our cutting edge and this gives us funding kind of things. And then convincing them that they should actually also have some kind of open data commitment was definitely a little highlight of my career, where it's like, where we've actually seen that this is actually makes a change. We've also worked a lot with, for example, international organizations, of which not every single one, particularly calling out the International Energy Agency here, has most of their data behind a paywall. And there's a lot of effort going on to trying to see if this data could actually be much more openly available. And it really works if you if you understand that, like, it's just people behind the scenes. It's just people who have who needs to be understanding this is that's actually not, it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. And sometimes it works. So yeah, there's lots of data that is unfortunately not open yet, but I've seen great success and great progress if you just make the case and show what can be done with open data, particularly in just examples like all of our work is open, completely open source, and how much it can be collaborative and how much it can have an impact exactly because it is open source.
Thank you, Johannes. And go ahead, Kassy.
Sorry, I know that we're just about out of time, but I just wanted to speak quickly to the fact about the paywalls and closed data, because sometimes with open data, we've also had some issues with the quality. So just agreeability between data sources that are reporting the same thing. So a lot of the times, and we've had discussions like this at the Datasphere and our meetings as well, we think naively, maybe, I don't know, that private data is better. It's behind a paywall. It's, it must be more valuable. But is it really? Can you actually use it with the open data that is readily available for you? Or does it have its own problems with quality? So I think that's another thing that's important to note, because behind a paywall, we want it more almost. It seems like maybe it has more value, but is it worth the risk to pay the money to get it? Or can we use what's open and try to enrich the open sources so they better fit our needs? That's kind of my stance on the paywall bit. But sometimes you do need that private data. Sometimes you do need to pay for it. So I get that as well, but it would be nice to see things more open.
Thank you, Kassy. I couldn't agree more. Having started working on openness issues back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I couldn't agree more. And especially when there is public investment, right, and public funds into research. But then there is always the issue of incentives, right? Like, how can we change some incentives so people, scientists, researchers make data open, and even companies learn to perhaps develop new business models, perhaps around services, but open the data, right? Because you're right, it might not be the best data. But anyway, I know we need to wrap up. So I shared in the chat, but if you are not in your computer, which I see you, do check out the website of the datasphere.org. There is an awesome atlas where we mapped almost 300 organizations doing work on data and data governance. We have a very cool literature review report coming out in December on the meaning of data governance and how that has changed over time and brought some communities together, from data management to in the business sector, to open data, to things like privacy, right? And we bring organizations that don't work purely in privacy, but organizations that understand privacy as a part of a bigger problem, especially now that lots of countries are developing their national data strategies, which we work a lot on. So we are working at the Datasphere, which is a nonprofit with the G7 and G20 countries, helping them figure out their national data strategies. So please be in contact if you want to learn more. Everything is Creative Commons license in our website. And I just want to thank the organizers for having us and facilitating this. Kassy, Johannes for joining us today. And also Mariana, who is our awesome researcher at the Datasphere and has joined us today too. So thank you all, and good evening, good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.